Great. Okay, I am calling to order the Communications and Water Efficiency Committee and Board of Directors meeting for November 17th, 2021. And our first order of business is to call the roll.
Director Russell.
Here.
Director Schmidt. You're on mute, sir.
Uh-oh,
Shocking. Here.
lost your voice.
Vice Chair Gibson
Here.
and Chair Kohler.
I'm here. All right, I need a motion to approve the agenda.
Move approval of the agenda.
Director Kohler, did we want to modify the agenda?
Oh, I think we were just going to move a couple things around. Ben, do you want to describe what you wanted to do?
Sure. The proposal is to switch items 3 and 5.
Just so, because some of us have to leave early, me being one of them. Is that okay with everybody? With
Yes.
that,
Sure.
Great. So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Excuse me.
Second.
Do we have any board comment on this item? Terry, do we have any public?
No.
comment on this? Do we have
We
any?
do not.
Great. Then we need a roll call.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gibson,
Aye.
and Chair Kohler.
Aye. Okay, that brings us to public comment on items that are not on the agenda. Terry, do we have any comments?
I do not see any. Oh, yes, now there is one. Drew Manning.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Manning.
Hear me
Go
okay?
ahead, Yes.
Thank you. Yes, thanks for taking or giving me an opportunity to speak here. So I live in Ross. I'm a resident in Marin for almost 10 years. And, just wanted to make an observation that a lot of the people in my circle and a lot of the things I see online, like on Nextdoor, people seem to think that the drought is somehow over because they tend to look at the reservoirs that they see every day, like Phoenix or Bon Tempe. And so a lot of them, aren't even aware about Kent Lake. It's kind of hard to get to. And Nicasio, people aren't aware that's part of it as well. And so, I think from my perspective, I just wanted to mention that, I think we need to do more outreach, maybe make the drought stats a little bit more front and center on your website, maybe have a presence out on Nextdoor a little bit more. So, I'd hate to see us kind of take a step back with conservation in light of the way people are perceiving, the recent rain. And so I know that we're maybe somewhere 55 to 60% on our reservoirs. And I don't think a lot of people know that. So that's my comment.
Thank you.
Those are great
Thank you
comments.
so-
Thanks.
Thank you so much for that. I think we're all right there with you. So we appreciate your being here today. Any other comments on items not on the agenda?
There are no further comments.
Okay, that brings us to the calendar. I need a motion on approval of the minutes from the last meeting.
So moved.
And do we have a second?
Second.
And do we have any public comment on this item, Terry?
We do not.
Okay, then we need a roll call vote.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gibson.
I was not at the meeting, so I'll abstain.
Okay, thank you. And Chair Kohler.
Aye. Great. That brings us to item 2, which is the survey results. And we are just so delighted to have FM3 with us today. Hi, Dave. And I see Miranda's joined us as well.
Good to see everybody.
So, good morning, Carrie Pollard, Water Efficiency Manager. So I'll just kick this off and hand it over to Dave Metz with FM3. As part of our drought response, we hired FM3 to conduct a survey of our high water users to help us have a better understanding of what might motivate them to engage with us as, what actions they can take as part of the drought awareness and reducing their demands. And as a follow-up to that, they actually conducted a focus group as well. And so I'll turn it over to Dave to give some of the key findings from both of those two endeavors.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Carrie. Thank you, members of the board, for the chance to be here today. I'm Dave Metz, partner with FM3 Research. I'm joined by my colleague, Miranda Everett, vice president with the firm, and the two of us worked on conducting the quantitative and qualitative research that we're going to share with you this morning. I understand your agenda is fairly tight, so we're going to move quickly through some of the key highlights of the data and then be happy to answer any questions that you all have. So our focus here in both the qualitative and quantitative research was on high water users within the district. These are folks who are in tiers 3 and 4. We sampled 100 of them in a quantitative survey that was conducted by telephone and online, and then followed that up with an online qual board discussion, which offered a smaller group of respondents, 9 of them, a chance to log on and answer some more open-ended questions about their water use, having a back and forth with the moderator over a 3-day period, twice a day online. And a lot of what we heard there, while it can't be generalized to the broader population of high water users with the same kind of statistical precision, helps us understand some of the thought patterns that lie behind some of the responses that we heard in the survey. Most of the data we're going to share with you this morning comes from the survey itself. You'll see that little icon on the sort of left center side of the screen to the left of qual board discussion. When you see those people sitting around a table, that's a reminder that that particular data comes from the qualitative exercise. So first, overall concern about water issues in Marin County among these water users indicates that there is a high degree of awareness and concern about drought. We asked the respondents to rate their level of concern with each of these problems in Marin County on a 4-point scale as either extremely, very, somewhat, or not serious. And we've ranked them here by the proportion that rated each issue either extremely or very serious, which is the number running down the right-hand side. Drought is—
Excuse me for a second. Excuse me. When was this done?
The dates of the survey you'll see here at the top of the slide.
September 9. Okay.
Yep. Early September, and then the qual board was late October.
Okay, thank you.
So 75% rate drought, an extremely serious problem that is ahead of risk of wildfire and climate change, which majorities rate as extremely serious problems. Obviously, those issues are all deeply interconnected, and this indicates that among these high water users, there is a high degree of recognition of the seriousness of the threat that they pose to Marin County. We followed that up with a more pointed question and asked them to indicate whether they saw the current drought in Marin County as being either a serious crisis, a significant problem but not a crisis, a minor problem or not really a problem at all. And here the results were overwhelming. 2/3 of our respondents rated it a serious crisis, just 1/3 a significant problem, and there were essentially none who dismissed it as not being a serious problem. So at a conceptual level, at least, these high water users recognize the drought conditions that we're facing. We also wanted to understand their views of public agencies that have something to do with providing water and water use in California. We asked them what they thought about county government, about Marin Water, and about the State Department of Water Resources, whether they approved or disapproved of the performance of each of these agencies. And as you'll see in the case of Marin Water, we had about half of those polled who said they approved of the agency's work, 37% who said that they disapproved. State DWR evenly divided opinions there, with a larger group saying they didn't know enough to offer an opinion. Now, to drill down a little bit on steps that have been taken to try to encourage people to reduce their water use, 90% of those we polled said that they were familiar with mandatory water saving regulations currently in place in the county. In surveys like this, there's a natural inclination for people to say they've heard about important public issues, even if perhaps they don't know a great deal about them. So the more meaningful metric is probably that top number at the top of the slide, the proportion who say they are very familiar with these regulations, and 57% say that they are. As we'll see as we go through the data, there may be certain aspects of them that they don't know a lot about, but they certainly have gotten the message that there are restrictions in place requiring them to save water. In the qualitative exercise, we asked people to tell us what they knew about the requirements were for reducing water use and what kinds of penalties might be in place for people who don't follow those requirements. And generally speaking, they were able to say, yeah, we've heard that we're supposed to reduce our water use. Some people had heard something about a 40% reduction, although most had not. But relatively few were aware of what the consequences might be for people who fail to meet the required reductions in water use. Most of these respondents, and this is the same thing we see in statewide surveys, feel that they are already doing everything they can to reduce the amount of water they use. Given a choice between the 4 statements you see on this slide, 4 out of 5 high water users told us that they have already taken significant steps to reduce their water use, including roughly 1/3 who told us they have already done everything they can and there is not much more that they can do to reduce their use of water. Now, as you'll see over the next couple slides, when we ask them about some specific steps that property owners can take to cut back on the water they use, it's clear that there are many steps that these property owners are not yet taking. So there is more they can do. They just may not be aware of what some of those options are that are available to them. But to try to understand what leads them to think that they can't reduce their water use further, we had a follow-up question where we offered the respondents a list of reasons that people offer for saying it's hard to further cut back on water use, and asked them to rate each one as either a major challenge, a minor challenge, or not a challenge for them personally. The top item you'll see at the top of the slide is their perception that they're already doing all they can to conserve water. 2/3 of those polled said that was at least a minor obstacle for them. And that's followed by not knowing how to conserve more water. And those two things, as we'll see, are intertwined. When we asked about more specific obstacles in terms of worries about how their home will look or their use of their lawn, it's smaller numbers, less than half, that are telling us these issues pose a challenge for them. So we then wanted to explore some of the incentives that might lead people to reduce their water use. And there's a couple of items here you'll see on this first slide that at least 3 in 5 of these high water users told us would make them more likely to cut back on water use. At the top of the list was having to pay much higher rates for water. More than 1/3 said that would motivate them. Knowing that what they did could protect wildlife, or having a specific list of the mandatory restrictions that apply to their property, also were motivating for about 3 in 5 respondents polled. And as we move down the list here, you'll see the impact of a number of these items sort of starts to drop off. Having the names of high water users published in the IJ, or finding out that a community leader is saving water and encouraging others to do so, lead less than half of those polled to say they'd be more likely to reduce their use, although there are still sizable minorities that say that yes, that would have an impact on them. I think some of the most interesting questions are the ones where we ask people to indicate, out of a variety of steps to reduce their water use, which ones either they are already taking or they will be willing to do in the future. The gray bars that you'll see on the left-hand side of these slides represent the proportion who say they are already undertaking these activities. The dark blue are the proportion who say they are not doing it yet, but they would be very willing to do so. That dark blue number is probably a good one to keep an eye on, because that's sort of the unrealized potential for cutbacks in water use. Things people aren't doing, but say, sure, I would do that if I knew it would make a difference. And if we add the light blue bars, those who say they're at least somewhat willing to do so, that yields the total that you'll see running down the right-hand side. So we've got more than 2 in 5 who tell us they don't limit their watering to early morning or evening hours, but would be willing to do so. 1 in 5 who say that they could replace their turf with low water use landscaping. 1/3 who say that they could put shutoff nozzles on their hoses. And 3 in 10 who say they would limit drip irrigation to 2 days per week. As we move down the list here, you'll see a number of items that we have smaller numbers who say that they're very willing to do. The place where we get the most resistance is the second item you see on the slide, not watering your lawn and letting it turn brown in the summer. Only 14% say they'd be very willing to do that. Only 13% say that they are doing it now. So, and 29% say that they flat out would not be willing to do so. So that's the place where we see the sort of clearest line drawn in terms of a step that people are willing to take. So having looked at some of the activities people can undertake to reduce their water use and some of the incentives that might be applied to encourage them to do so, the next key question is, how can that information be communicated to them in ways that they'll notice it and be motivated to take action? We offered the respondents a list of different information sources that might be used to communicate with people about issues relating to water use and conservation, and asked them whether they would definitely pay attention, maybe pay attention, or definitely not pay attention to each of these methods of outreach. The ones you'll see at the top of the list are information enclosed with your water bill. That's 46% say they would definitely pay attention. And given the importance of water rates to people's decisions about water use, having that information side by side with what they pay, understandably, is likely to have an impact on them. The sort of informal communications with friends and neighbors also have a sizable see here, with 41% they pay, another 40 that they at least might pay attention to those. Generally speaking, outreach on social media, television, or radio seems less likely to capture these high water users' attention than those more targeted forms of communication going with their bill, or those informal networks of their friends and family. In the qualitative exercise, when asked about the nature of communication that might move them to take action, one of the things that came up often was people saying that they wanted the information to be concise, very short, very direct about what they can do and what the consequences of inaction might be. Many others said that they also would like to see information customized to their property that sort of speaks specifically to their own water use and what they might be able to do given the nature of their own property to try to cut that back. So that's
You might want to drop your video. You're getting pretty chopped up. Your voice is being pretty chopped up. You might want to drop your video.
Larry, I think that's you. I think the rest of us here, Dave.
I didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sounds fine to me.
Yeah, I think we're fine. I think that might be.
Is it me? Okay. Okay.
Yeah. No, I think it's actually better to have him talking to us. Do you want to run through the conclusions, Dave?
Yeah, so in the interest of time, this is obviously restating a lot of the key findings. So maybe I'll just pause here and happy to open the floor to questions. I'm happy to answer. And then Miranda, who moderated the online qualitative sessions, is available as well.
Thanks so much. I'm just going to start us off by thanking you for a very thorough study, and thank our team. I'm sure you were working with our comms and water use efficiency team on this. So I think you guys did a great job with the survey. I think the questions were right on. It's very interesting. Maybe I'll start at the back. It's really interesting, the differences in responses about how people want to get information. So I think the takeaway from us, there's a tendency, a very honest one, for people to say, oh, this is the best thing, or that's the best thing. And I think what this really documents is that people get information in a lot of different ways. And there simply isn't one. I understand that the bills came to the top, but especially given the comments that you then had, I think we simply need to embrace as a entity that needs to be communicating with our public that people are getting their information all different ways, and we need to be in as many of those places as possible. I mean, that's what it seems to say. I just want to check with you and see if you would concur.
I think that's 100% correct. It is not unique to this issue or this population. It's just a fact of modern life. The information sources that people use are more fragmented than they've ever been before. And so there is no single way to be confident that you're really going to get everyone's attention. And so repeating the same messages, keeping them simple and concise, and using multiple means of outreach to reinforce them generally is the most effective strategy.
I have some other thoughts, but I want to be sure I'm getting my other board members in here.
Well, yeah. Would you go over again the group that you polled? I know high water users. Define that a little bit. And I know you did the beginning, but it went kind of fast, and I didn't get it all.
Sure, and I'll defer to Carrie or others more on the specifics here. But these are this was a random sample of tier 3 and 4 water users.
Okay, and random sample, how many?
100.
100. Good. Thank you.
And scattered into the various districts.
Yes.
It seems to me, Emma, when did the letters go out to the tier 3 and 4s, the ones you talked about last night?
They have already been sent. They should have arrived to those users.
So they just got there
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. Okay.
One to 2 weeks.
The reason I'm asking is it seems to me it might be wise to tailor this survey and do it again in light of the comments from the gentleman from Ross.
I'm not sure I'm following that. I mean, we're not going to get that big a change in a month or 2 months.
Well, we had this letter go out telling them how much this bill's going to be after the penalties are kicked in. So I think there is a big change that's occurred.
Well, it also was before our October storm, as I understand it, September dates. So that's probably the most impactful fact right there.
Yeah. I mean, I see what you're saying, Larry, but I think to Dave's point, there's not going to be one thing, you know what I mean, that gets this across. Some people are going to read that, some people are going to toss it. Yeah, so I mean, we could do polling every month, which I'm sure would make FM3 super happy. But
Well, we've also had the rain in between these times, huh?
we have, exactly. So I think we could see changes both ways. I think the benefit of something like this is to take away from the high messages. It doesn't necessarily dictate a policy direction, but you know, these are sort of like, and especially it's only 100 people, right? And it's only 100 people at the highest level. So, you know, there's always going to be limitations, but I think it does point us in some interesting directions, you know, especially, you know, the number of people who think they're already doing as much as they can. To me, that was fascinating, especially juxtaposed with, oh, well, if rates change, that would really inspire me. So again, I don't think that's surprising, but I'd be interested in whether, Dave, you and Miranda have any thoughts about those two results together.
The notion that they think they're doing everything they can, but that rates might impact them to do more.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's really sort of there's a triangle of responses here that are significant. The perception I'm doing everything that I can, which leads them to sort of be hands off and maybe say, well, when I hear about the drought, I'm already, you know, being virtuous enough on that score. But then second, the rates being a motivator to say, well, wait a minute, maybe I'm not, and it's going to really cost me if I don't. But then third, the critical step is saying, and here's a bunch of concrete things you can do that you're not already doing that might help you to cut back. I think getting those 3 points of information together, I think, are sort of the key messaging takeaway from the survey.
Yeah. Our sort of accepted notion, and we've mentioned it, articulated it several times, is that rates are not going to impact the high users. We're not going to get there with rates. This seems to dispute that.
It definitely does. It definitely does.
Well, I want to qualify that a little. Rates will affect people more than anything else will, but there were still a segment of people who said even higher rates wouldn't change me, about a third of those polled. So those people are out there who are rate insensitive.
Yeah.
But to the extent that people are movable, rates are still a lever that can help.
Well, and maybe to build on that, I mean, there's always going to be some at that level, Dave, that aren't movable, but the fact that I guess it's glass half full, half empty. To me, the fact that it was only a third as opposed to 80%, which is, I think, what we keep hearing, that people at these higher levels are just not movable. That says that there's fully 2/3 who are at least potentially in their own perception movable based on rates.
Right.
And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that it is less the financial cost of the rate that may move people as much as the fact that that's sort of it's a trigger, it's a shock. It's something to get their attention and say, hey, you're not saving as much as you think you're saving. And that may at least make them willing to listen to what else they can do.
Mm-hmm.
There also seems to be a relatively high number of folks who are at least open to the idea of changing out turf, higher than I would have thought based on what we're seeing in that program. So I don't want to in any way violate the confidentiality of the survey, but if there is an appropriate ethical way for us to be in contact with people who might be open, and maybe that's just a matter of contacting everybody in the survey, I don't know. But to me, that seemed like a pretty significant finding.
Is there anything in the data that you can see that would suggest good citizenship is an impactful message? I mean, can we interpret the fact that they're rate sensitive, not so much that they're spending the money, but hey, I'm out of tune with everybody, you know? Yeah.
I think that's exactly right. I think that the rate is a signal to them. It's a wake-up call to some extent. So it's less, you know, hey, I can't afford this. And it's more, I thought I was doing everything I can, but wow, maybe I am out of step.
Yeah.
And you saw a bunch of the other motivations that people have are things like impacts on wildlife, which obviously matters a great deal to people who choose to live in Marin.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I think that's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
I
take from that, I think that suggests to us an avenue for messaging to promote just literally the good citizenship of conservation and saving water, you know.
Yeah, I think so. I didn't see that come out in the data as much as other messages around, you know, how serious it is. And what their friends are doing and that kind of thing. But
I think-
yeah,
I think you have to
Those are all
articulate,
related.
right, you have to, it's not just be a good citizen, it's
yeah,
responsible members of the, our whole community will be affected, and we will all benefit if we cut back in the following ways. It's sort of defining what good citizenship means for the community as a whole.
yeah. And I think marrying that to, I think a very significant message is, as Dave was saying, to being much more specific about what individuals can do. I think we've just got to move past turn off the water when you brush your teeth to, here are the significant investments that you can make with us as a district for the long term, not just for this short term. And I think Larry Bragman was trying to make a comment.
Yeah, the one thing that jumped out at me was that emails may be more effective than snail mail. And I'm just wondering, as far as confidentiality, whether we can selectively email these high users as a group, but not identifying them and sort of tracking them, and if their consumption doesn't come down, sending them email reminders. I mean, it seems like we do have the data, who they are, where they are. So, maybe we ought to do that. I mean, I think we need to sort of try to train them with giving them those signals that they may actually read, and giving them, direct messaging with those things they can do, the investments that Cynthia mentioned. Because I think repetition, it eventually will get through, once you kind of break through that mental barrier that most people have about changing behaviors.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just to make sure we're all on the same page about what Dave and Miranda found here, it looks like your final conclusion is that actually, I guess some people are going to care about emails, but most likely to pay attention to bill enclosures and word of mouth, even more than email. Am I getting that right?
Yes, but back to your earlier point, it really is all of those methods of communication, together reinforcing the same points.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we've got some stuff to absorb here. This is an information item. Any other board comments before I move to public comments on this? Okay. Terry, any public comments on this item?
Yes, Larry Minigis, please.
Just briefly, I think this calls for the need for AMI to be enacted as a way to really do what you need to do, which goes back to the other day with the bond. And I do feel that that alone is a huge move towards conservation in this county. And so it was kind of said that we need more conservation efforts if we're going to add to the bond, but this has to be considered as one of those. And that's all I wanted to say this morning. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Larry.
Excellent comment, Larry.
Any other comments, Terry?
There are no further comments.
Okay, then I think we're going to thank our friends from FM3 and move on to the next item. And I'm sure there'll be some follow-up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being
I
here.
had could I ask one other question? Do we have a geographic sort of grid of where our high use customers are? I mean, is there any geographic similarity, or are they grouped in any one area?
We haven't done that analysis, although we have all of the locations in GIS, so we absolutely could map it out, but it hasn't been done to my knowledge, Director Bragman.
It might be interesting, because we might be able to, I'm assuming it's going to be areas with larger lots, Ross, Tiburon, those areas. And, maybe we need to engage more with muni government, to partner with them. So.
But Larry, we have to be careful. We have to keep it generalized. We can't specifically pinpoint users' accounts.
No, I mean, I don't think we should, but I mean, if there are geographic, similarities or groupings, it just might enable us to focus our messaging a little better.
Yeah,
I think we could start, couldn't we, with just a listing of the tier 4s and tier 3s in each of the districts, what the numbers are or the percentages.
Yeah.
Just start with something simple like that.
Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
and we do know that. Okay. All right, I'd like to move on, if that's okay with everybody, to the new item 3, which is the water efficiency update.
All right, I have that item. Good morning, Carrie Pollard, Water Efficiency Manager. So for our water efficiency update today, let me start with an overview. We're going to review the intertie draft principles that were discussed last night at the board meeting. Staff has made some revisions, and Paul Cellier will cover those. Then we'll move into establishing long-term water use limits and targets. Go into some detail around goals for establishing these long-term targets, our historic per capita, a range of potential targets for your consideration, and then also looking at benchmarking against other metrics as well, in addition to other local retailers, and then also drought conditions. And then finally, wrap up with an update on the informational residential water budgets, which are being developed. So I'll have turn it over to Paul Cellier to do this section.
Yeah, good morning, board. So next slide, Carrie. We'll get through this very quickly, and I just wanted to thank Carrie for allowing me to hijack her presentation this morning and the board's indulgence for something that we spent some time on last night. But we felt we got some great feedback from the board that was quite specific, and we were able to include, we think, and capture some of those comments and sentiments in these revised principles. And these are by no means complete, but we just wanted to share with you how it would look. And last night, Director Bragman, you pointed us to the district code definition for emergency. And there is a slightly different code. It's just the one before, I think, the one you were referencing, that talked about how, that linked the definition of an emergency to the storage level on December 1st in the vicinity of 30,000 acre feet. So it's very clear and delineated, which I think was your specific request. Staff have added to this item just for discussion, in the event that there is some major other emergency, would the board want to use the intertie to meet the health and safety? And so we wanted to include that just as for discussion. And we can take these one by one or just go through them and then didn't get some quick feedback.
I think it makes sense for you to just run through them, and then we can talk about them, Paul.
Yeah. And then in terms of the water transfers, right, same, maximizing our local resources. We didn't hear too much in the way of desire to change that. And I think the board felt that that was a reasonable thing for us to be doing. So next slide. We did hear in terms of the water efficiency that clearly we can't, in the time frame between last night and this morning, come up with numbers that would be sensible. But Carrie will get into some of that a little bit later in this presentation. So we wanted to just share with you a slight change to the format here in terms of what we heard last night with respect to the, this overall reduction in water use and the overall gallons per capita for the district. And then translating that to something that our customers can really relate to in the residential per capita. And those will sort of be fairly equivalent. Next slide. And then in terms of the source of water, we did hear that the district and the board is interested in how we prioritize that water source in terms of sustainability, but also in terms of being able to really leave something better than the way we found it. And I think Director Bragman expressed it, some sort of a healing process, as it were, or improvement process for the Delta or whatever water source we happen to be using. And so we've included here acknowledgement that the financial investment for the protection of aquatic species and associated ecosystems. And then thinking about sort of the transfer sources themselves, keeping that notion of declared surplus and consumptive use. And then the last one, I think the board were on board in agreement with that the intertie would not affect the operations of, we had any water agency partner, we've changed that to public agency partner. So it's just a little bit broader. And that's it. We did change some of the whereas statements, and you'll see that in the email that I sent out earlier this morning. but this is the sort of the adjustments we've made since last night, and just curious if you have any quick thoughts.
So just to start off with a couple of quick thoughts, I think this is a good start. I think this is responsive to the conversation that the board had last night. And I want to particularly bring everybody's attention to the bullet where you broke out the overall reduction in use to the district and then to the residential sector. So we talked about that a fair amount. I think the way you're setting that up is exactly right. I'm stunned that in, less than 12 hours, you couldn't come up with numbers. No, I'm kidding, obviously. But I think that as a frame is exactly right. And I'm hoping the rest of the board is going to agree with me that having both of those metrics is important. I think we've seen a lot of confusion about what we're expecting from individuals as opposed to, the district overall. So I think this is extremely helpful. And what strikes me in particular about the benefits of calling out a residential use number is what we just heard from FM3 about how people really want to know, what does this mean for me? Generalized numbers, it's important to know that there's a drought, yada, yada. But in terms of actually motivating them to action, loud and clear, they need to hear how it's relevant to themselves. So that's kind of my take in tying what Paul has come up with just now with what we just heard from FM3.
Yeah.
And so
I agree, and I'm really pleased that it's kind of shaping up pretty nicely, and really appreciate expanding the comments about sourcing, which I think is going to be critical going forward as far as defending this project ultimately. So really appreciate that change, and I'd like to kind of mull it over. I think it's pretty close actually, but there may be some additional information we can throw in there, additional conditions that may sharpen it a little, but I really appreciate you getting back to us so quickly. I think that's very helpful, really. So thanks for getting back to us like this. It's important.
It was really good feedback last night, and we of course have an ulterior motive at staff level. We would like to share these principles, at least as a draft form, for one of our key partners with East Bay Mud.
Right.
Yeah.
What is your timing on that, Paul? Is it today?
We'd like to get them over today if we could, just in this draft.
If I could, Paul, the timing President Kohler is they want to get it in the mailing at the end of this week for their board packet. So end of day Thursday.
Right. So I'm going to suggest this. I think I'd like to avoid having the board weigh in with line edits or wordsmithing. So if it's okay with the board, I think the way to proceed would be to go with what Paul has come up with here. And if you could just put a draft watermark all the way through it, that would work for me. I just want to check and see if that works, because it will be now a public document, guys. So it's going out in a board packet at East Bay Mud. So I think the draft watermark should be very prominent, and I think, we're going to have a further conversation about exactly how we want to be presenting this. But with that caveat, how do the rest of the board members feel about this being conveyed to East Bay Mud?
I don't disagree with the procedure you've just outlined. I will give you a heads up that I'm very concerned about the direction of all of this and uncomfortable with being willing to spend $100 million on a project that we then cripple ourselves. So it depends not only what the language is, but where it fits into the scheme of what we're doing. And if we're talking about generalized principles, I have no problem whatsoever. But anyway, as to the procedure you're talking about, yes, time is of the essence. I'd say go with that, and then we'll. I feel a little crippled too. I haven't quite caught up to the agenda change we just made here today, and looking at this effectively for the first time. But nevertheless, I understand time is of the essence. Go with your procedure. I think that's workable.
All right,
I
I
think-
appreciate that, Jack. And I just want to assure you that I hear that there's a larger conversation to be had here. I get that.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge that too. I think that we need to have, I think, a bit more of a meeting of minds. I understand sort of it can seem counterintuitive to restrict the ability to use this expensive investment. And at the same time, it is, I think, for a number of us, it's a really significant concern that we are not exacerbating what are really dire conditions in the Central Valley and in the Delta. I would just, I don't want to wordsmith this here too, and I'm fine if we don't do any changes, if this does go out as draft, but I do think that we need to have greater, I'm a little concerned about, frankly, on the use of the term prioritization of transfer sources shall be based on. I to some degree, I would like to see it be stronger than just prioritization, because that actually really just says, we looked, we tried, the cheaper water was taking water straight out of the Delta, and we considered it, but it didn't determine things. I really want to have some clear guidelines around environmental protections of regarding where the source water comes from.
Yeah, and Monty, I mean, I hear your concerns. This is a draft, and I think in addition to operational guidelines, we're also building political guidelines here to help sort of put together the support we're going to need for folks in the district to understand why we're doing or why we're considering the project, and the guidelines or the guardrails, as President Kohler has termed them. So, I do think the source principles could be sharpened a little, and maybe take out the words prioritization of transfer and just say transfer water sources shall be based on, period. So, I don't know if that's going to meet your concerns, and I know it's going to take a little while to digest it all and put it in context. But that all being said, I'm okay sending it out as a draft, as a draft.
Yeah, I think Director Bagman, you're making an important point, which is that the public that really cares about the environmental impact of what this pipeline can do in the Central Valley, where there's a lot of concern. This is part of what will help people to understand our intent. Exactly. I do think to that end, that point number two, we as the more inside baseball people understand what it means to say that otherwise would have been consumptively used. That's not going to, the ordinary citizen is not going to understand that that's meant to say that this is not water that would have otherwise been available to rivers and streams and fish and wildlife. And so I think if there's one change that I would encourage us to make is to be more clear about what number two is, stating protection of rivers, and that it would not, I don't want to wordsmith it, but you get it, would not be otherwise used for in-stream flow for fish and wildlife.
Right. I think, I don't know that we want to add that right now, but I agree. And I also think that there's a difference between a document like this and then a messaging document that explains it. Because to Jack's point, at some point, do we go from just high level principles to something that's binding in some way?
Who is it binding on?
Right, exactly. Right. We can only bind ourselves, Jack. But my point is that that's the conversation that we need to have, about which we don't yet have consensus. I'm just saying that we're going to need different words for different vehicles is my point. And I think we need a messaging vehicle is going to be different than this, which is, I think, really a high level statement of principles for, and I think Director Bragman is correct, not just ourselves internally, but for the public and for our political partners and our partners in the whole project.
I don't disagree, but I don't think we can necessarily control, like once this goes out, this can be picked up as our message on these things. So I want us to be careful that we may not have perfect media messaging on this.
Right. I'm just saying that's what we need in addition to this.
Mhm.
This can't be, what I'm saying is this can't be the totality of our messaging, is my point.
Is our first messaging on it though?
I agree.
Yeah, well, that could kind of, usually the first message has priority, so it's not an unimportant decision. So,
Right.
I don't know, Monty, if you can come up with some quick suggestions instead of consumptively used that really.
I would say in addition, I feel super strongly we have to, that has to be in there as otherwise we're not making the legal point we need to make. But if we
Understood, but
add
I'm
to
just,
it, that's fine.
Monty had some suggested language that's a little more clear. That's all I'm suggesting.
We could footnote that and then on the bottom have a more expansive, it just would be an approach to keep consumptively in if we want it.
No, leave consumptively used and would otherwise,
Okay.
and would otherwise be consumptively used. And then add to that. So you
I
keep,
see.
you,
That's what I'm getting
There's
at.
a bit of an explanation to follow to sort of expand on the concept of what that means for the public, that what you're looking for.
yes,
I think we're all
not
agreeing
as a
about
footnote.
that. I think we're all agreeing about that.
So, maybe do a footnote or an asterisk, just so, there's a clear message that folks are going to get that, this is not water that we're diverting, from habitat.
Right.
Yeah, we can add, I think, a comma and just be very explicit in the bullet.
Yeah. I think that would actually be even better than a footnote. I think being explicit in the bullet with a comma and just saying more about it would be great.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, and it's important, I mean, I know it's a draft, but it's got primacy, as far as messaging. So.
Okay, so it sounds like just process wise, is this something that does the board feel like it needs to see that again before it goes to East Bay Mud, or are we confident that we've run this issue to ground and we're okay letting it go with that addition put together by staff?
I would just like to see, Paul, if you could just email it to us, just so we could see the final product.
I think we should see it again.
Yeah. Okay, I just want to make sure that we don't need to meet again, I guess, because I think the direction to staff holds, prominent watermark that says draft. I mean, this isn't a formal board action, so we don't need to convene for a vote, but if there's, I just want to make sure that staff don't have their hands tied here.
So is this the only change that people want to see before it goes out? Then can I just suggest we take really 1 minute and draft it now, because that might actually really be the fastest way, so that we don't have to wait to see it back.
Okay.
Yeah, Molly.
I have some language that I've been noodling on as you guys have been discussing that I can share if you'd like.
Sure.
Again, it's on the fly, so far from perfect, but maybe it'll hit the mark. And so what I would propose is, after consumptively used, we have a comma, and then a bit of an explanation that we would say something like, meaning that it is not being diverted from use for in-stream flows or for support of fish and wildlife.
I would just add "and habitat," just to be clear.
Okay.
We're talking about everything. Fish, wildlife, and habitat, aquatic.
Yeah. So can you say that again?
Sure. So after consumptively used, it would be comma, meaning that it is not being diverted from use for in-stream flows or for support of fish, wildlife, and habitat.
How's that sitting?
Well, I mean, all water that's diverted could have been used for in-stream flow and use. I'm not
Exactly.
not sure
Well,
that
I think that
exactly.
it's not other. And Cynthia, you've got an eye toward this too. It's that it's not in. The protection is that we don't want it to exacerbate and lead to further depletion of in-stream flows for fish and wildlife. Again, all this water comes from our rivers and streams. unless it's groundwater, but so it's not leading to a further depletion of in-stream flows for fish and wildlife and habitat, something like that. Is that
Like
So
that.
meaning that it is not leading, it's not causing a further depletion from
I
use,
wouldn't say causing, I wouldn't
or
say causing, I would say contributing.
not contributing. Okay.
How does
Not
that?
contributing to a further depletion.
I think of
From-
in flows, right? Monty, isn't that what you want to get? I think that's the idea you're trying to get across here.
Meaning that it is not
yes?
I think we're making our life
Contributing to
hard for no
further
reason by
depletion.
doing this.
Yeah.
We've got till Friday, right?
No,
Why don't we just-
Thursday.
We don't. We have to get this out. They want to put in their
Gonna
board.
say draft in any event.
It is, yeah.
So,
Okay, so what I have so far working with, meaning that it would, that it
Can you
is-
share your screen instead of reading it?
I'm sorry, I'm writing it on a notepad as I
That's
scribble
okay.
it down.
It's just
I
a
don't
phrase.
really
It's just a phrase. We can get
I'm
there.
low tech, I apologize.
Right.
Meaning that it is not contributing to further depletion of in-stream flows or support of fish, wildlife, and habitat. I'm working with, I'm trying to not
I think
overchange.
for a draft, that's fine. It's getting the idea in. If that's okay with you, Monty, because I think all this language is going to likely to shift a little bit or considerably, but I think that gets the idea in for purposes of what we're doing right now, which is just narrowly getting this to East Bay Mud.
One other brief, in terms of the current state of this, the forthcoming slides, I don't know we're going to get through them with all the board being able to be here, but they're designed to come up with a number of reductions. So we probably won't make that. So we could keep the X's and Y's in there that we have it.
Oh,
or
definitely.
Yeah.
or
Agreed.
or as a placeholder, we could put the 20%. And the reason I'm saying that's just, if you'd let me, the reason I'm suggesting the board consider that is that will be viewed by East Bay Mud's board as a very ambitious, maybe not high enough for us, but I'm just saying it would signal something significant, and they are interested in what we're going to be doing in regards to conservation. So, or we could put in 25% as a placeholder. I'm just suggesting we may want to not leave it just open.
Yeah.
So I have a really hard stop. So I have 6 minutes, less than 6 minutes. My concern with putting in a number is that numbers are hard, even if they're draft, and it'll be very difficult to walk that back. It'll create, I'm very uncomfortable. I understand. I think what you're saying can be conveyed to them verbally, but I am concerned about putting a number out there because I think some of us are going to want to see much higher numbers. And I don't want to be in a situation where we've got a number out there and it becomes the number. To me, numbers are become even more the narrative than words. And so I'm a little, I think I'm alarmed about putting a number out there that'll be very difficult for us. Then the article, then the article becomes, oh, you changed your mind. Now you're doing less or you're doing more. And it's just, we're not there. We don't have a number. So I think you can convey verbally that we're talking about something significant with 20% as a minimum. But I think it's a political and messaging mistake to put a number out there when we're so far from having that.
We could add the word minimum, minimum, so that would somewhat, take the, pull the teeth on that, misuse of the statement, but.
That's just my take. And I just have concerns about getting ahead of ourselves on something like that, because we really do want to be establishing these goals, not just for this, but for ourselves much more broadly, just for how we're going forward, in our water supply planning. Anyway, that's where I'm at, but, and I'm so sorry. I just have to go. I have this next thing I have to jump onto. So thanks for everybody's patience. And I'm trying to remember, oh, Jack is, I think, the vice chair of this committee.
I think somebody else is going to have to do it because I'm working off the wrong agenda.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, Monty, do you mind taking over? I think we are up to.
I've got a drop off earlier too, so
Oh, okay.
maybe Director Bagman.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine.
We
I've
are-
got the.
Okay, great. We are, yeah.
Could we get back to the draft principles for the sourcing while we still have everybody?
Okay.
Molly, can you just read your language, please?
Yes, so what I have so far is comma, meaning that it is not contributing to further depletion of in-stream flows or, and I don't know if it makes sense like this, meaning that it is not contributing to further depletion of in-stream flows or support of fish, wildlife, and habitat.
You don't need or support. The or support doesn't work there. It's not.
So in-stream
flows that
flows,
support.
period.
Oh,
That
is that what you're
support.
trying to say?
I think that I was looking for the right proposition. but
yeah, there
that
you
sounds
go.
like the right proposition.
Yeah, there you go.
That support fish, wildlife, and habitat. Does that work
Yeah.
for people?
Monty?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Do
Okay,
you want me
that's
to read it
good.
one more
So
time,
you-
or are we good?
I think we're
I
good.
think we don't
Okay.
have any more time. So let's just go with that.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Okay, so I do have a few more slides actually discussing the potentially establishing long-term water use targets. So when we look at considerations for conservation targets, we want to recognize that we want them to be achievable. We want them benchmarked against our historic minimum use potentially. We'd want to be able to compare them to other agencies and their per capita use as well. Want to acknowledge that having a target that's based on per capita use allows us to have, maintain that goal independent of population change. And as opposed to saying, a specific number of acre feet savings that we'd be shooting for, instead we can look at it as a per capita number. We want to have it relative to non-drought use levels, right? Recognizing that right now we're asking our customers to take really extreme actions to reduce their demands in light of our water supply conditions, and that we want to retain as much of those savings as possible in the long term, but not necessarily, require them to, not always flush the toilet or, capture their water and take it outside to irrigate their trees. Want to recognize also that there's having a bit of a reach is absolutely appropriate, right? We wanted to have something that's attainable, but also forward-looking to really continue to curb demands, and establishing a horizon as well. And we're proposing through 2030, so the next 10 years. We've seen this graph before. It shows population growth since 2000 going through 2020, and then also the per capita demands from the district. I want to keep in mind that when we talk about this per capita use, it's district-wide. We're not talking about residential gallons per person per day. We're talking about system-wide. So that includes not only our residential customers, our commercial customers, landscaping, but also water loss, right? So it's production divided by population. So it's all uses within the system would be included in this figure. We've also seen this graph before showing that we're really currently kind of in the middle of the middle of the road for when we look at statewide comparisons. And so we're currently, or as of 2020, we were at 124 gallons per person per day for a district-wide per capita. When we kind of narrow in a little bit further, looking at the district in comparison to other water retailers in the region, we can see City of Sonoma is quite high. There's various reasons why each of these various utilities have different per capita use. So Sonoma, it's tourism. Tourism really drives up their demands. You look at the very bottom down here, San Francisco. San Francisco has very little landscaping, high density housing, right? So of course it's primarily indoor use, as we've seen efficiencies and fixture efficiencies improve over time. Places like San Francisco really benefit from that because it's mostly indoor use. Not getting the fluctuations of outdoor use. And then the rest of us are kind of in the middle here, right? The rest of the pack, with Santa Rosa kind of being a more of our maybe closer of a comparison, if you would, than San Francisco or Sonoma, but they're down at 99, or we're down at 99 in 2020.
What are they
Would
doing?
you say that would you say the difference between us and Santa Rosa is based on probably a combination of, is it our outdoor irrigation use?
Part of it could be lot size, it could be demographics, it could be, people per household. There's, that's a challenge when you look at per capita and do a comparison, right? We should only be comparing to ourselves, right? Because our demographic, right? It just makes it a better comparison. But we do recognize that we do get compared to others all the time. And so I wanted to include that.
Another big driver, and it's why San Francisco is so low, is kind of percent of high density compared to single family homes. And right, San Francisco's off the chart, so they're able to be among the lowest. And Santa Rosa is probably closer there than where we are, which is predominant single family homes.
Yeah, it seems like it's basically a measurement between urban and suburban. I mean, that's the heart of the difference, it seems to me.
That's definitely part of it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to to kind of dive into comparing us with Santa Rosa to see if we can come up with any changes to kind of match them. So
potentially, yeah. So when we look at the range of conservation targets, right, we use using the 2020 GPCD as our baseline of was 124. And, I think we've heard that, 5, 10, and 15% savings would not be adequate or appropriate necessarily. And so really focusing in on this 20% reduction, which would be a 99 gallons per person per day district wide, which is, actually consistent with Santa Rosa's. And it actually aligns currently with our consumption through October of this year. So with the drought, we are definitely seeing a decline. And I have a slide that goes in a little bit more detail on that in a moment. Or, going as far as 25%, which would make a district-wide GPCD goal of 93. When we take into consideration those 20 and 25% reductions, you can kind of get an idea of where that would put us in the pack with the rest of the retailers that we had just seen a comparison on. Another way to look at this would be also looking at change in per capita water use over time. So looking at the last 10 years. Interestingly enough, in 2010, our GPCD was 124, just like it was in 2020, which you'd think, off the cuff, you think it's a straight line, but really we had a drought in there, right? We had our all-time low in 2016, which was 105 gallons per person per day, district-wide. Also, interesting to note is of all the local utilities, 20% was the highest reduction that was achieved from San Francisco over a 10-year period. Santa Rosa was able to get down during the midst of the last drought down to 84 GPCD. And so, I think all of this can kind of help inform, what direction might be realistic for us to pursue as a district-wide gallons per person per day target. When we look at the current drought conditions, right, because we recognize things are very different now, and we're seeing demands drop in ways we had never seen before. Looking through August of 2021, this column here, we're down to 96 gallons per person per day, which is a 23% reduction and a new historic low, which is quite impressive. But as I noted, we are asking our customers to take extreme actions to reduce their demands. And San Francisco, it was brought up last night, is down to about 67, and this is district-wide, not residential.
So, I mean, that's an important point, that we're at 96 through August, and we've asked our customers, as you said, to take extreme measures. And the 20% goal would just be around that 98 versus 96. And just in my view, that would be the 20% reduction, a very aggressive and ambitious target to institutionalize in a way the level of consumption that we got through these, intense measures.
Yeah.
So when we look at the 20 and 25% in comparison to the rest of the state, you could see we're definitely would be shifting downward. We'd no longer be at the middle of the pack. We'd be, being really more aggressive, I would say, in our efficiency programs. And finally, I wanted to show kind of how our historic GPCD and what these potential targets might look like in light of our recognizing our 2020 Urban Water Management Plan population projections, which was recently adopted, would have a baseline, establish this baseline of 117, right? And so this is where we are now at about 96, through the rest this year, and where these two targets would potentially lead us to, recognizing that we do anticipate some rebound from, post-drought, water use will slightly go up, but we're also really dedicating many of our drought programs to ensure long-term water saving. So our turf replacement programs, right? Those sorts of programs will continue to reduce demand. It's really the behavioral shift is where we'll see, potentially some rebound. So this was the slides I want to show as far as establishing targets. If there's input on direction or anything else the board would like to share before I move on, I'll just stop here for a moment. I keep going.
I'll tell you, Carrie, my impression is, and not that we're going to do it, but to set a goal, minimum 20% target is a pretty good goal. If that could be instituted on an ongoing basis, that says something. And, that really would spread our supply, availability significantly. So yeah. I don't know how the other board members feel, but that kind of looks like the realistic number, really.
I mean, I would say that it looks in the range of significant and aggressive without being crazy. But I must admit, I wish that I could see that number in terms of our indoor water use and landscape water use, so that what we come up with is based on what we think we can do in those two parts of our water use, and let that drive what the number is. And we need those numbers separately anyway if we're going to provide those, as we just talked about. So in some ways, I'd go see what we could do in those two categories and how that affects, what does that roll up to in terms of overall GPCD.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah.
All right, so yeah, I do have a couple more slides. I want to give an update on the informational residential water budgets, which actually is directly related to this discussion, recognizing that this question of what does this mean for me, right? What is a goal, per capita goal, might mean to each individual customer. So we are developing informational residential water budget. So these would be custom to our residential customers to look at their indoor use, their outdoor use, and establish a budget that's specific to them, to give them essentially their own goal, and can compare it to their actual water use. We have a contract signed with a consultant to develop these. We're breaking it down into both indoor and outdoor option or figures, and we're going through various methodologies to figure out what makes the most sense for the district, and different utilities have done it in different ways. So some of the methodologies we're considering is having an indoor water budget that's fixed at either 5,000 gallons per month. Another option would be to look at the number of bedrooms based on parcel records, right? Number of bedrooms, kind of a direct correlation to population or occupancy, if you would. And then also considering average indoor gallons per resident per day, or possibly gallons per day per connection as well, right? So all of these are being evaluated. We're also looking at outdoor budget options. We have the irrigable landscaped area from prior work, and we're establishing a multiplier of how many gallons per square foot would be acceptable for weather patterns within our region and evapotranspiration and such. We also know that there are quite a few large parcels within our service district, and so that just because you have a larger lot doesn't mean that you just get the same amount of gallons per square foot for every square foot, or every piece of drop of land or area of land. So as the lot gets larger, the allotment would be reduced proportionally.
Whenever we've done this sort of thing before, we have always considered the rather distinct climatic regions we have within the county. So what role is that playing here, if any at all? I mean,
Yeah, it would potentially be tied into the gallons per square foot. And that will be something else we look at, recognizing that we do that when we have our connection fees as well, right? And so we had to have a
Right.
breakdown there. And so that's being evaluated as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jack.
We're looking at having these completed in January, and then we'll determine kind of next steps at that time. Some additional information that's kind of feeding into this is a slide showing the State Water Resources Control Board publishes residential GPCD for every water retailer in the state. And I'm looking back to 2014 through just August, you can see a significant reduction in our residential per capita use as part of our drought response. And historically, we kind of peaked out in the summer, 115, 120, right in that range. And then during the winter, we can see our lows going down to, high 50s or so. And I think that as we continue to get more information from things like our flume water users, where we are still seeing indoor per capita use below 40, and even dropping as low as, mid 30s, it really will help inform, what does that indoor allotment look like? And then we also have the square footage measurement, so we can kind of determine what does the outdoor allotment look like and roll those up together to establish a meaningful residential GPCD target.
As I have said routinely, Carrie, my wife and I still stay below 35 gallons total per day.
It's impressive.
But it's not necessarily impressive, but it's hard work. You have to pay attention. We capture all wasted water and we don't irrigate outside except for very little amounts for certain conditions. Absolutely none right now, of course, with the rain. But I think 35 is a very doable number. It just, 55 is a piece of cake for two people. 35 is very doable and was supported the other night by the woman that indicated that when she started paying attention, she was able to get her numbers down. She thought we were taking showers at the gym or whatever. We're not taking showers at the gym.
Excellent. So as far as next steps, we received input from the draft intertie principles, and Paul's will take care of those. We'll continue discussion on this long-term conservation target, ideally with the full board to get some consensus around that. Ultimately, that target will feed into our water efficiency master plan to really outline what actions and what policy changes and what is the investment needed to meet that long-term target. Teeing up the development of residential gallons per person per day goals as well, and which will align with formalizing and finalizing these informational water budgets for residential customers. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you all may have, any additional questions.
I don't have any direct questions on that, but it's going to affect our revenue to reduce consumption. So it's going to be an interesting issue to balance our cost of service analysis with reduced consumption. So not sure how that's going to play out, but it'll be interesting.
I think you know exactly how it's going to play out. I mean, it's obvious, it's tough sledding. No question.
It's basically maybe 60% of the reduction would translate to a needed rate increase. So if we got 20% reduction, it's somewhere on the order of 10, 12% rate increase to keep kind of status quo, given, of course, variable and fixed costs breakdown. And I was also thinking about fixed part of our rates and commodity part. So it's somewhere in that ballpark.
Right, and maybe maybe shifting some additional activity projects into capital maintenance like conservation, so that at least we can sort of pick up those costs with the CMF. So,
right.
Yeah.
That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, the challenge with the CMF, you get a different return on the percent increase, even if it has the same net effect on revenue, right? 1% on overall rates is about $1 million. To get $1 million out of the CMF, it would be, 8% increase.
Yeah.
So, anyway, you get
Yeah.
where I'm going.
Yeah. It's a balancing act, for sure. So any other questions? So do we have another item? Is that it?
We actually have two more items.
Oh, okay. Do we have public comment on this item?
There are none.
Okay, so is it time to move on to our next item? Okay, very good. Let's do that.
You're the boss, man.
Oh, next item. This is the communications activities update with Emma.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. I will share my screen. Okay. I know we have a couple more items, so I'll move pretty quickly through these. So I'd like to give an overview of the communications work that has occurred over the last couple of months since we last met. I'll focus on our direct-to-consumer outreach, some of our latest social media efforts, and then wrap with some community engagement news. So I think, partially some of these efforts, they tie nicely to the presentation given earlier in this meeting with FM3. We heard that people liked concise messaging, that they liked direct communication, and they wanted to hear from us in a lot of different mediums, a lot of different ways, but one concise message. So here we have our postcard that is going out to the entire service area. And in addition to the postcard, we follow that up with social media posts. We follow it up with a direct email through the e-news. So very low on the text, heavy on some graphics, and just very clear, pointing back to our website with a short overview of what the new restrictions are that are going into effect December 1st. We spoke a bit about this at the board meeting last night, but just wanted to highlight again this going to our higher water users, our tier 2, our tier 3, and tier 4, with that customized information about how these new limits and penalties affect them. And then the information here highlighted in the yellow box, just very customized data on their water use and then the resulting penalties and fees. Also included in those custom letters that have been mailed that are arriving in mailboxes for the single family homes and services, we also included this infographic. I believe we've shared this before, but just wanted to note that we've included it in that direct mailer, also on our website. And we've been using pieces of this on social media as well, just really trying to walk our customers through what really is a different and can look a little complicated on face value. So we really wanted to walk through exactly how the penalties break down and water use and the impacts of those. So a front and back, an infographic walking through these changes. And in addition to the letters going out and all of our outreach and social media, just wanted to highlight, when new programs like this happen, we also keep our website up to date, and we have to sometimes create new, new processes internally. So this is just an example of something on our website, the occupancy adjustment. So if more than 4 people are in the household, there's an occupancy adjustment form that can be filled out. So this is just tied to some of our processes, and wanted to shed some light on the work that goes into the website to make the process easy for our customers to engage with us on. So we also heard during the earlier presentation that the bill inserts remain one of the main sources of information that our customers use to get information from the district. So since we last had our communications meeting in August, we have sent out our September, October customer newsletter. And this was focused mainly on our water use restrictions. We're right in the middle of the drought emergency, so it was heavily focused on that. And we also recently sent out our November, December customer newsletter, a bit more balanced just in terms of adding more information about our rebate programs and looking ahead. The challenge with these customer newsletters is the 2-month span that the information must stay relevant through. So with things moving quickly and things changing, we try to keep the information as high level but informative as possible. So we learned with that September-October newsletter that we had some changes to these restrictions during the time period when this newsletter was out. So we've since adjusted to keep the information more high level and point back to our website for the latest information. We also use our e-news to send out more frequent updates with changes and stay in touch with our customers over that 2-month period. So I have some examples of that later in the presentation, but we have heard for years that this is one of the main sources of information. So it's a really a key piece of our communications outreach strategy, these inserts into the bill. In addition,
Emma, so you pre-print these somewhere?
Right, we do. So they're produced the middle of the month ahead of that 2-month time frame. So we have to put them into production. There's 50,000 that are mailed. So the information, we have to look ahead on that 2-month period and see what will stay relevant for that time frame. What are customers going to be looking for in terms of the information? Is it timely to the time of year? And looking ahead, not sure what the rainfall would be. We need to have information in there that will make sense if someone opens it December 31st or they open it November 1st.
Sure. But why couldn't we contemporaneously print these with the bills so that they would be the same time frame as the bill?
So they go into, they're inserted through that 2-month period. So they were the billing.
I understand that. But yeah, what I'm saying is, why couldn't the billing vendor print them at the time they print the bills, which are spread out throughout the 2-month period, and just, if you need to change it, you change the wording and you give a current document to the current bill?
Yeah, I like that idea. I think that would be a great process. Right now, it's 2 separate vendors. So one vendor's printing and sending it in bulk. I think it's something to look into for sure. It's just not the way that the process is currently set up.
These are not sent with the bills?
So they're sent at one time. So they're sent as a bulk shipment to our billing vendor, who then inserts them as the bills are printed, but they get the newsletters all at once from a separate vendor.
It seems to me it'd be worthwhile talking to the billing vendor to see if he could print these. And that way you can make your changes as you need to change them. I mean, obviously you're not going to change them every day, but maybe once a week you could have a deadline, a drop dead deadline on Friday afternoon at 5 or something. Here's the one for next week. Here's the one for the following week. And I don't think it matters that different people get different inserts. I mean, it's current information. It's not that we're removing something, it's we're adding something.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I can look into that.
Another comment, this is a bigger picture comment. It seems to me, if you're sending out 50,000 of these and we have 60,000 accounts, that I presume means 10,000 are online paying or something like that.
Yeah, I don't have the latest numbers from the customer service department. I know that we've been pushing for more online payments versus sending out the paper bills, but
ballpark.
That sounds right. The majority are still getting their bills in the mail, and then that seems like the proportion is accurate for the online bill pay only.
What I'm proposing is that it seems to me that this is the time, Ben, to make a super push to get people to pay online and get rid of this cost of, if you'll remember back, and I don't know what happens when you take the mailing out of the cost of doing bills, but I think the biggest hit was the cost of the mailing in the cost of the billing. I mean, surely producing an online document to bill somebody can't cost very much, as opposed to producing a hard copy that gets mailed to them. So I think, if we need to make a discount or we need to do something to attract them, a one-time thing, give them a flume, who knows what, to convert on to online billing would be far more efficient, especially for this kind of information dispersal.
Thank you. So in addition to the newsletter itself, we also have the opportunity to have a second insert into the bills. This is what is in the November, December bills rolling out. So it's a two-sided indoor-outdoor water savings potential. Just gives all of our customers information about how much water the water using fixtures in their homes, indoors and outdoors, use, and then some suggestions for either replacing those with higher efficiency models or changing behaviors to save water here. So, whether reservoirs are spilling, not, we're still in this drought emergency. And we thought that this would be a good guide for customers to have and keep and use throughout the coming months.
Yeah, no, it's excellent. I just opened it today, and it's something Suzanne Whalen could use if she ever gets the student programs going, to educate the kids. They will educate their parents, and this is a very good piece for that.
Definitely. We ordered extras for this for the lobby for passing out at events, exactly for those uses.
Yeah, it's a good piece.
So I mentioned the e-news earlier. We've had September, October. We seem to be kind of on an end of month wrap up kind of cadence. So our November one will be going out soon. But this is, I think we have about over 40% open rate on these going out to our customer email list, which is really great. It's much higher than the industry average, which is closer to 20% for a government agency sending out these kinds of email newsletters. So our customers are receiving the information. They're opening them. We have that data. So we also have the click-through rates for different articles. We usually have 4 to 5 pieces of news, timely information in these. And we, in addition to these e-news for the month, we send out, features on rebates. We send out, if we have a new program that we're focusing on with Carrie's group, or like the Flume discount coming up, we would send these more timely information through those email newsletters. So e-news has been a great new tool for us as well. So moving into social media and some of our digital outreach efforts, we continue to work on just improving not only the frequency of our posting, but the quality of the images, the graphics. You have a really strong team here, a strong, small and mighty comms team. Gavin Murray, communications specialist on the communications group. He is almost all of the photographs that you see are his work. He's wonderful. All the graphics, everything. I think it's really elevated what our brand looks and feels like out on social media. So, we also repurpose, being such a small team. So you'll see we took a graphic from that water saving sheet, repurposed it on social media. This is just kind of a sampling of some of the posts that we do. So we do conservation messaging. We try to do a lot of watershed imagery. This is for the Tour de Drought, which I'll talk about in a couple of slides here. And then also just timely updates on the reservoir storage. So, before the storm, after the storm, reminders to turn off irrigation. We really just cover all of our different message points across social media, always trying to keep the look and feel really sophisticated. And we've definitely grown our followings across all of our platforms. So just some additional samples. We're trying to feature customers that are doing conservation programs. So this is an HOA. We get this information from Carrie's group with the water conservation specialist that we then feature on social media. I did want to highlight, we have a very small budget for paid social media posts. So these are 2 examples. You can see one reached more than 14,000, the other 10,000, which is much higher than the page has in organic likes or follows. So we're paying a nominal fee to then put our posts in front of more eyes across this platform. So just a highlight of some of our more successful paid social media promotions. And not directly social media, but almost every one of our social media posts links back to our website. And I just wanted to note that since our August communications committee meeting, our website view, we have had over 300,000 website views. Some of the samplings of our top pages, Water Watch, always super popular, especially with rainfall. Water Watch even above our login to the online bill pay system. So just for comparison, we we really have, quite a following for our Water Watch page. And before launching the new website, I think we averaged something like 50 to 60,000 views for our website. So we've far surpassed our previous standard for website traffic. The rebates and programs, conservation messaging, the water use restrictions and recycled water pages all were in this top visited pages of the website. So I definitely think this points to our message getting out and people engaging with our content. Moving into community engagement. Previously mentioned the volunteer program, Suzanne's volunteer program. We're happy to report that we've met with Suzanne and we're going to be getting that back up and running full steam. They're outdoor events. We follow all of the COVID safety guidelines. So we're going to be getting many more events published and on the calendar, and hope that our loyal volunteers and new people interested in volunteering on the watershed will participate. So just an example here of one of our recent events. So we'll be promoting that more heavily. It was on a bit of a hiatus just due to the uncertainty of group events and that kind of in-person gathering. And Le Tour des Drought, really excited about this. It's been ongoing. It was really an event to raise awareness and to encourage conservation. And we launched a new website, was designed by Gavin Murray on the team here, tourdedrought.com. You can check it out. That was designed and launched. And we really just have this emphasis on stewardship, partnerships in the community, and then this like community feeling around drought response. So partners here, MCBC, One Tam, Pond Farm Brewing Co. We'll get to that in a second. And of course, us. And I think we've had 70 plus participants complete the course and register, and probably a lot more that have done it informally without registering, but we feel that it's been successful. So Pond Farm, they have their own signature Tour de Drought brew that's made with local Marin water. So if you happen to be in the neighborhood, you can stop by, pick that up. Limited edition cans here, collector's items. And then we borrowed some of our creative from our recent advertising campaign and made these water bottles. So if you register, you get a free water bottle, or by request. We have plenty. So just getting our messages out and keeping that brand going, seeing the Marin Water brand and organization in new places. And we think it's a great event and just a different way to raise awareness about the drought and community engagement.
Maybe we could use those for the incentive for the get online billing.
Yeah,
they look very pretty, and I think that it gives a good message. It's something that lasts, and it might be enough to who knows what triggers people on that kind of thing. Maybe we could ask our guy from earlier in the survey if they have ideas on how we could get people to convert.
For sure. That's a great idea.
And of course,
So
I don't know what the status of the board members is, but I hope all the board members have converted. And one has for sure. I have. I don't know about the others.
I will just note on the online billing. You don't miss out on the newsletter or any of the inserts. We have PDF versions and they're linked in that online. If you opt to online bill, you're not giving up your newsletter. We're still reaching those folks. It's just a digital version.
That's good, because that's a change, because before all we used to get was just the bill. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. So looking ahead, the next couple of months, I think we'll be focusing heavily on additional outreach for the Emergency Intertie Project, community outreach there, have some webinars, online meetings planned. So we're focused on that. We're working on that. As usual, we'll continue our rebate and incentive promotions, that outreach, get participation up. And, generally just adjusting our messaging and our tone to really this new normal of sustainable water use in Marin. I was here at the district, started in 2015, and we had really strong drought messaging going. And then I think, between then and this next exceptionally dry period, we kept that drumbeat steady, but I think that we missed an opportunity to shift to a new normal of sustainable water use. We had a drought response and then kind of a back to normal. And I think this is an opportunity to establish a new normal in terms of norms and how we look at water use. And I hear the comments, especially last night, about landscaping in Marin, and that's a big shift and change. And this is one of the banners on our website. So it's not that no landscaping, it's just, it's a new way of looking at it. There's ways to incorporate sustainable and water smart landscaping that, could become the new look and feel of Marin that is still beautiful, still representative, positions us as, moving to that new normal and being pioneers in that way. So just wanted to end there, and happy to take any questions. I think we've switched items for the next one, so I'm not sure who comes next, but I'm happy to take any questions, comments, feedback.
Okay, great presentation. And it's going to be a new normal of communications, I think, to sustain this level of conservation. So really good, really good. Good stuff. Any other comments or questions from the remaining board members? Jack?
No, I'm good. Good.
Okay. Larry Russell? He's gone, or he's otherwise occupied. Okay, that was great. And I want to do the tour to drought. That looks very interesting. So I'll let you know. I'll let you know how that goes, and I'm going to switch to online billing just so I have actual accomplishments I can report. Okay, so thanks a lot, Emma. And then
we have one public comment on this item.
Sorry about that. Yep.
No problem. James Krajewski, please.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to comment on the messaging around sustainable landscaping and health and safety issues, because it seems to me that those are contradictory. If water is only to be used for health and safety, then it seems to me landscaping is out. It'd be hard to make an argument that that's a health issue, I think. And it depends on where you're using this concept of health and safety. But if you're only going to get water for health and safety, I would think a lot that we're going to have our water supply depleted first before you can get health and safety, because people are using it for landscaping, for pools, for other things that are not health or safety related. The other thing I would comment on about the billing is I've had online billing for a long time, but I seldom look at the bills. And I wasn't aware that these inserts were in there until this meeting today, at which I went back and looked at my bill, and I found this tiny little link down there to something called invoice enclosures, which I hadn't looked at before because I don't look at the bill. So I think if you want to get those messages out, you're going to have to rethink the online billing. Otherwise, people are perhaps not going to see it. One other thing on the billing that is confusing is my water use is compared to the area average. Well, it looks fantastic, my water use compared to the area average, but I'm not sure that that's a legitimate or useful comparison, because I could increase my water at least by twice and to be up to the area average. So I think you need to define what the area average is or be clear about that. Otherwise, it's a bit misleading about how much water we're conserving. Thank you.
James, those are great comments and I appreciate them, especially the one about the box to check, because I would imagine you may be doing what I do, which is to pay these without looking at them. In other words, it's auto pay. So I that's when Emma said that, I was surprised, because I still was operating under the thing that there was nothing attached to the online pay bills. And I'm very pleased, Larry, to hear that you're going to do it, because as I always say, little steps for little feet.
Yeah. Emma, can you embed the PDF into the bill so that they don't, so that customers, as soon as they open that up, it's there rather than having to do an extra function?
I believe so. I'll talk to the customer service and see what that process looks like. I would imagine so, but having not attempted it, I don't want to overpromise.
Yeah, but you know, anyway, to not have to open up a PDF and wait around or whatever, you know, plus they would get the graphic.
Even
Yeah.
to find it, huh? Even to find it on the, where to click.
Yeah, that too. So, I mean, it might be kind of an easy thing to do. So anyway, we should look into that, and we'll see when I get my online bill, whether that can be happening. So,
Definitely.
okay, so that was great. I think we're done with that. Any other board comments? So let's move on to the last item, which is a water efficiency update from Crystal.
We actually already did the update. It's we swapped 5 and 3, I want to say. So now it's prohibiting non-functional turf.
Okay.
And limiting single family duplex turf areas. So this is prohibiting non-functional turf is an item that the board has requested that we bring forward. And so we have put together a kind of a straw man and outline to get your feedback on. So the intent of this discussion is to really recognize that district potable water would not be used for irrigating non-functional turf on any site that's not a residential site, a single family or a duplex residential site. There's really 2 ways to go about doing this. One would be looking at converting our existing turf areas that don't provide community benefit, would be considered non-functional turf. And the other way would be to update our code to align to prevent future installations, right? So that new developments don't install non-functional turf on these non-residential sites. Furthermore, an opportunity would be to consider limiting new single family and duplex residential turf installations, and also looking at considering actions that could be taken around existing single family and duplex turf installations. So an overview, we'll start with our non-single family residential non-functional turf. Again, looking at removal of existing non-functional turf and preventing the installation of new, and then dive into the single family installations as well. So removal of existing non-functional turf. To establish a program or an initiative to convert current turf areas that are deemed non-functional, we would propose kind of a 3-step process. One would be to establish definitions. What is non-functional turf? Recognizing that there's various different sectors that would be affected by this, including commercial, multifamily, and others. We'd also want to establish a variance process, and finally develop an implementation plan for the rollout of these conversions. And we'll go through each of these items. Starting with the definitions. Preliminary definition of non-functional turf would include the following. That it not be an area that's used for recreation, right? That it's too small to offer meaningful benefits, somewhat like the photo I have included here. Located adjacent to streets or thoroughfares that affect its use. So if it's in the middle of a shopping center, it can't be accessed, it could be deemed non-functional. In areas that are difficult to access or limited by the access to that area. Areas that are difficult to irrigate efficiently. So if they're maybe even too small, so our current code actually limits an area down to nothing smaller than 10 feet, because 10 feet in width can't be irrigated efficiently. So we actually don't allow areas smaller than 10 feet in our current code, but also other, sloped areas or oddly shaped areas are also difficult to irrigate. And then finally, preliminary definition includes that it's not nearby amenities potentially. Some additional sector-specific definitions would need to be created, recognizing that there are some areas that turf would continue to be that could be potentially deemed non-functional, but could still provide community benefit. These would be areas like active or program recreation areas at an HOA, or sports fields, of course, would be allowed. Sites that have designated turf use areas, so like locations that have weddings or maybe at a cemetery, those sorts of areas. Golf course play turf areas would be allowed. It would be specifically within the course of play, meaning, turf areas, small swaths of turf around the clubhouse would be deemed non-functional, but the actual play area would be allowed. Recognizing pet relief areas may be needed, so allowing up to 200 square feet for commercial or retail services that are focused on pets. Playground turf areas, these would be smaller areas potentially next to playgrounds at daycares, parks, and churches, those sorts of establishments we would allow them to maintain. And then also allowing for multifamily and residential turf areas, so up to 130 square feet per unit for recreation and leisure, and that these would be, not near the street. They would not be near the, the park, the parking lot area, right? It would kind of be put in a location that makes sense for use from the residents of that multifamily housing. And we also recognize that there's probably others that we haven't thought of yet, right? And so if there are others, we would have a variance process, and it would be intended to provide reasonable accommodations for sites that we may have not taken into consideration in developing this non-functional turf prohibition. And here's a good example in the photo of a playground with a smaller turf area that wouldn't meet the 1,500 continuous square feet, but does provide value, and it would be recognized that those would be deemed acceptable. Looking at an implementation plan for this prohibition on non-functional turf, this is we can be removing what's currently in the service area that would be deemed non-functional turf. Would we have a targeted adoption date of January 2022? So we'd work over the next month or so to develop the specific code for the board's consideration for adoption. We'd have a mandatory conversion would be required by January 1st, 2025. So it would give us a few years for implementation. We would need to, of course, start with notifying all of the sites with non-functional turf, and then also recognizing that this will, impact our local landscape contractors, landscape suppliers, and others, as mentioned by Southern Nevada Water Authority during their presentation to us. And it's also important to notify them as well, so that they can kind of prep for this increased workload within the region. As far as incentives, we could continue to offer incentives to install climate appropriate plant material. In years 1 and 2, we would propose keeping the $3 per square foot incentive initially, and then in year 3, reducing it down to $1 per square foot to really help motivate customers to take action, in the first 2 years. And then when we go beyond where it becomes a mandatory in January 1, 2025, we would move towards enforcement and not have any incentive available for the removal of existing non-functional turf. We would also propose updating the district code to align the definitions as established for non-functional turf to prevent new installations. So this would address our kind of new connections that are non-residential new connections. Moving into limiting turf areas for single family and duplex sites. So there we go. Residential code for new connections could be developed. We wanted to just give a couple of examples of what some of the other utilities we're seeing implementing around limiting residential turf areas. So North Marin Water District limits turf to no more than 25% of the landscape area, or up to 600 square feet, with nothing less than 10 feet in any direction. So it's very, very particular. And over the course of the last decade or so, they've actually continued to ratchet that 600 square feet down. It started at about 1,200, and then it went to 1,000, and now it's at 600. Southern Nevada Water Authority limits turf to no more than 50% of the landscape area, not less than 100 square feet, and not more than 5,000. They actually don't allow front yard or side yard turf areas as well. So it's limited just to the backyard. Staff has developed code or some language for the board's consideration to kind of help, give us some direction on where, what the capacity is for pursuing something that would address single family new connection turf areas. We develop or we propose that no turf areas less than 100 square feet and not more than 1,000 square feet, with a not to exceed of 25% of the total landscape area. We recognize that there are some mini lots, actually residential lots, that may only have front yards and not backyards, right? So we didn't want to put a front yard, backyard, side yard limitation, but we did want to propose an overall site, limitation of up to 1,000 square feet. The target adoption date could align then with the proposed non-functional turf prohibition in January, so it would be taken as a package. Furthermore, we recognize that the existing turf areas in single family and duplex sites is really the majority of our turf area within the district. And that potentially existing homes that make landscape changes could be required to comply with the turf limitations that were proposed on the prior slide. So for example, maybe the no turf less than 100 square feet and no more than 1,000, not to exceed 25% of the landscape area. Implementation of this would be need to be kind of refined and kind of worked out if you know, one way to describe it, because the trigger, right? It's you know, what we're seeing is, you know, potentially folks is rolling out sod, and so how do we, you know, if they're not pulling a permit, which is how the other triggers would be handled, how would we know, right? And so we really focus on outreach and education to our customers, just to help kind of essentially do what Emma was just talking about, right? Kind of a new norm of, you know, is rolling out sod really, you know, what we want our new landscapes to look like. And we also find that a lot of times folks update their landscaping because they're selling. And so doing outreach to realtors and recognizing that the realtors do have a lot of influence over, you know, curb appeal and what's deemed kind of acceptable within the community and also through the landscape industry. We could utilize water budgets to determine compliance, right? So we kind of know the square footage of the current landscape areas for these residential sites. And so we could use those to kind of shape and drive demands down. And then ultimately potentially going to something more stringent like retrofit on resale. Although, you know, there's challenges associated with retrofit on resale. And I think starting with the outreach and education first kind of help tee up the need to do something more stringent, potentially down the road, if we're not seeing compliance or we're not seeing engagement from the community. So wrapping up with next steps, we're looking for board input on development of these new codes that would potentially address the removal of existing non-functional turf in the service area, the prevention of installation of future non-functional turf, limiting turf areas in single family and duplex sites for new connections, and then also finally potentially limiting turf areas in retrofit landscapes within single family sites. We would work to refine the implementation plan, so we have something to bring forward to the board in January, which would include the enforcement policy as well. I do want to note that we have a consultant on board who's determining the locations and the size of the non-functional turf areas within the district, and we'll have those available January. So we don't have them yet, so we don't know like the extent of the impact of potentially for making these changes. But we do recognize that you know, we were asked by the board to bring it forward, and so you know, there's an opportunity regardless of the size really to kind of address these non-functional turf areas within the district. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a question on the retrofit landscaping. If they're not pulling a new permit, not only do you have the issue of not knowing, but what's the penalty? How do we impose a penalty on that?
Yeah, enforcement will be key on that. And it's really, I think the initial step would be the outreach and education, right? And so reaching out to local landscape contractors, or the nurseries who are selling plants, our sod, you know, people who are doing sod installations, realtors, and just increasing a broader awareness to our customers instead of leaning in directly into the enforcement phase. But you're absolutely right. That is something that we will have to work out and kind of refine. And so I don't have an answer to what that would look like yet.
All right. And that is not necessarily a drought related penalty we're talking about. This would be, I'd be kind of surprised if we even have the authority to do that, to tell you the truth, but.
Well, we have the authority to, well, Molly could correct me, to determine what's acceptable use of our water, right?
It's a restriction on how potable water would be used. That's how we implement our existing landscaping restrictions or requirements currently. It is a directive on what we think is an appropriate use of potable water and how we provide guidance on that.
Obviously, that's an area we have to be careful.
Yeah, I've got to run to another meeting, but I would just simply say, this is really great. I'll be really curious to see the analysis that we'll have back in January about where this can generate savings, and that might help us to target how we go forward. I don't know how much we can do between now and when those results will come out anyway, but I think that information will really shine some lights on how we might go forward and where our biggest benefit can be seen. So, but thank you for developing. This is really, I think this is the right direction for us to be moving in.
Anybody else? Yeah,
I think.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Larry. I think we have to be very careful here, though. This is extremely subjective and opinionated, huh? I mean, it's when you say we, who's we? I mean, are we talking about, and this is no offense, Carrie, but are we talking about Carrie Pollard's opinion? Are we talking about a panel of people, including citizens, their opinions? I mean, if you took Molly's definition to its logical conclusion, potable water should be used for potable purposes, huh? I mean, that's the definition of potability, means drinkable. So if you're not drinking it, it's not potentially a good use of potable resource. So I think we need to get our antenna up a little more, get a little more sensitivity to the public, and to try and integrate some thinking community-wide, not just the thoughts of MMWD or a single person at MMWD as to what the best approach is.
Yeah, and I agree. And I don't think, what's been presented here is just, the subjective thoughts of one person, but, using potable water for non-potable uses is considered waste under the California Water Code. So I don't think we're deviating from the overarching public policy goals in California, but I agree it's going to impact the look and the feel of our county, and we need to be sensitive to the community. So I think it's something that should be definitely done with a lot of input, maybe doing some public events, like we did with e-bikes, where we really invite people in, because a lot of people are really into gardening and landscaping in Marin. So, and I think it needs to be presented as an opportunity and not as some kind of enforcement action. It's a way of engaging with people and hopefully creating a new aesthetic that's even more beautiful, so that it's an opportunity and not seen as a penalty. But, we got to start somewhere, and, you obviously there's been a lot of thought put into it as far as, how do we put it into words?
So am I hearing, I think I heard from Director Russell, and maybe supported by Bragman, the concept of considering what a community advisory group could look like for some of these initiatives. I think there's power in that. I think it's similar to what Southern Nevada did on putting some definition to the non-functional turf and design of the program, because for me, it does make a lot of sense. And I'm thinking right ahead when we have to enforce non-functional turf. And, this is going to be a hard thing. And it's going to be a lot of people, property management companies that haven't been in the loop, or all sorts. So I think having kind of the community behind us in some of these things, and being informed about how to do it and taking that input. Anyway, it's a direction I'd like to pursue.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And also don't forget about the gardeners. This cuts across a lot of things. It also seems to me that we're putting ourselves squarely in the crosshairs for folks who come and say, look, we don't want to get rid of our grass. We want you to provide recycled water.
Yeah.
And I think, that's a very fair argument. There are 13 sewage treatment plants in Southern Marin. I can't imagine that all of them couldn't be functioned to produce reclaimed water. So I think we better be very careful here how this thing gets turned around. Now, I'm thinking just logically that perhaps we could go, I don't exactly know how you define the potential distribution area. I guess you'd use the collection area of the sewage plant, but they could conceptually set up community service districts, CSDs, to fund that reclaimed water. Now, I guess we have the issue of, do we want to run 13 reclaimed water plants? You know, that's one issue. I mean, as opposed to 1 or 2 or 3 larger ones. But logically, you know, at the best, well, it changes when you get to recycled, but at the current situation, less than half of the water used is coming from the inside. So we're only going to get half of the water back. Right. Now, if we change and we stop using potable water for outside irrigation and only use reclaimed water, then it would just be the inside water we have to work with, which may not be enough. I don't know. And Carrie, maybe you can put in here, if we use 2/3 of our water in the summer for irrigation, it seems to me that we need 2/3 of our water for irrigation, but we only have 1/3 of our water to supply. And we've been working with several, this is actually a funny story, Calistoga Ranch, which is was a real high-end facility in Calistoga that burned down in the Hall fire. We were involved in helping them get their recycled water plant up and running. And we're in a meeting and they go, well, you know what? It's working so well, we need more water. We go, no, wait. You can only get the water back that you put in. So there's no place to produce more water. But that's how successful these kind of plants are. They see that water works fine. You know, it's a little saltier than the original water, doesn't smell, doesn't look any different. And the gardeners and everybody adapted to it and loved it. So, you know, I think this has some real ramifications, Ben, on the big picture of water planning in Southern Marin that people are plenty smart enough to figure all this out, and they're going to start pushing on us. So I think we better start thinking and having some plans.
Yeah, well, I think community outreach is really important, you know, because it's personal. It's personal.
Absolutely.
So,
Well, it's personal, but it's also in their pocketbook, huh?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I don't know I think to change to that picture that we're currently seeing from the Zoom from where we are to that picture is a long ways, you know, in people's minds to say that's as beautiful as an English lawn. I don't know. Maybe.
Okay, well, it's going to be a challenge, and you know, I don't want to prolong the meeting. You know, rainwater collection could also play into irrigating, you know, landscapes.
Yeah, Larry, though, I looked at that when I moved here, and I needed to put in, I forgot the numbers now, but it was at least a 25,000 gallon tank. I looked at building it.
Come on.
No, for providing full irrigation. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you need a 25,000 gallon tank to produce your irrigation water for the whole year from the rain.
Okay, but it refills, you know, occasionally, right?
No, but you still need that volume.
Overall.
You don't irrigate when it's raining. Well, you don't irrigate when it's raining, so you're not drawing it down when it's raining. You're
Well,
only
the
drawing it down
challenge
when it's not
is,
raining.
right, we don't get rain 6 months out of the year. Some places they get rain every couple weeks, a much smaller volume.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
look,
but those places don't have cisterns.
Right.
Cisterns are built in dry places.
Okay. So it's all part of this bigger conversation, and this is just the opening bell we've got today. And so it's a good one, and it's a good start.
Absolutely. So, and just in my own house, Larry, I know this business, okay? And I moved here in the middle of the 92 drought, and the sprinklers were off. I mean, we just let the lawn died. Sure. And I looked at, like I say, building an underground storage tank of 25,000 gallons. That's what my mind is. It might be a little bigger, a little smaller, but it's the size of a good sized swimming pool to produce enough water to make it useful. And I decided I couldn't do that. I didn't want to do that. it was too much hassle to dig up the backyard and build this big tank underground. So I just said, I'll just go with the flow and see what happens. But I seriously looked at it. Okay. I mean, I did the numbers, how much water could I collect, blah, blah, blah. And, that's what I ended up with. But I would have no problem strongly supporting the construction of those kinds of facilities. I think cisterns would be a wonderful addition. Now, it gets a little more complicated. Ben, do you know if we have any houses that actually discharge to the watershed, that their rain is on the watershed? Most of them, I don't think, aren't on the watershed. Maybe the ones in like San Geronimo or something.
So that they drain
actually
into the watershed, into the creek, ultimately?
Yeah, end up in
I
our water
don't
supply.
know. Yeah.
Some of them up in Mill Valley on Tam probably do,
Right.
But probably not
Kentfield-
very many.
Kentfield, there's quite a few houses up there in the hills.
But relatively a very small number when we
Yeah,
look at our
yeah,
service
yeah.
area.
Yeah, one of the things I did in an early calculation was our watershed is equivalent to collecting the water off 180,000 rooftops. That's the acreage of our roughly what I just roughed out size of a house. And so just kind of put in mind, we have 60,000 connections. We need the watershed collects from what would be equivalent to 180,000 houses. That's if, you had hardscape on the, roof, finished roof and collected all the water. So it just kind of puts things in perspective of where the water is. There's, obviously you can't get enough water off of 60,000 homes if you need 180,000 homes to collect it. So, they kind of don't go together there. We're using 180,000 homes worth of water for 60,000 homes. So, just keep that in mind that there's just, mass limits on this stuff.
Right.
But
that's also,
it makes
that's also the point of reducing the amount of turf because we're using.
Absolutely. But if you don't want to reduce the amount of turf, then you have this option. And, I think that would be a perfect waiver to say, if you're willing to put in, and I'll just use my number, a 25,000 gallon tank to collect rainwater, then, you're waived from these conditions. You can have all the grass you want.
Okay.
Or whatever the number is.
We may have some public comment on this, so we need to let those folks speak their piece. Do we have any?
No, there are none.
There you go.
That's interesting. We wore them out.
Okay. So I guess it comes back to us. Any other comments from the board or staff that should be spoken before we adjourn? Okay. That sounds like a no. It's been fun. Good to see you all.
All right.
See you
And
soon.
nice job, Carrie. Nice job on the
Yeah,
presentation.
it was all good. All good. Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you all.
All right.
Okay, see y'all.